Environment and Housing for January. There's a number of things I'll need to read out for the sake of the people who are watching in. Social distancing measures have been reintroduced in rooms 6 and 7 in light of recent advice regarding COVID-19. There is a seating plan in place and members are asked to remain in their designated seat. So if you are looking in, that's why it looks as though we're all spread out. It's not that we're not talking to each other, it's just that we're being spread out. There are 4 microphones available for speakers at the table, and guests will be invited to the table to speak on the respective items. Until that point, officers and external guests are asked to sit in the area next to the public gallery. Where there are more than 4 additional speakers for an item, officers will be required to rotate, and committee members are asked for their patience in that regard. When you vacate your seat, you're asked to use the wipes provided to wipe down the workstation so it's all ready for the next speaker. There are a number of other mitigation measures that have been recommended by health and safety officers in relation to physical meetings. It is recommended that everyone takes a lateral flow test prior to attending a meeting. Meeting rooms should have a maximum ventilation for committee rooms 6 and 7. Real-time monitoring of CO2 will take place with adjustments made to airflow. There should be regular cleaning of surfaces, especially speaking zones where we've all got antibacterial things at hand. Where a seat is used for multiple speakers, for each change, the speaker is personally responsible for wiping clean prior to and after use. And then finally, in line with government advice, members, officers and the public are strongly encouraged to wear face coverings when moving around the Civic Hall in crowded communal spaces, but not when you're speaking in committee meetings. So that's the reason why you will see people not wearing masks. It's because most of them will be speaking at some time or another. So let's go through the agenda, and to do that I'll pass over to Tash.
Thanks, Chair. So starting with agenda item 1, there's no appeals against refusal of the inspection of documents. Agenda item 2, there's no exempt items from the exclusion of the press and the public. Agenda item 3, there's no formal late items. Agenda item 4, please can I ask members to declare any interest? I'll take silence as none. Agenda item 5, apologies have been received from Councillors Finnegan and Akhtar. Councillor Jenkins is here to substitute on behalf of Councillor Akhtar. Apologies have also been received from Councillor Rafiq and Councillor Arif, Sean Fletcher and Victoria Bradshaw.
Clarify 1 or 2 other things when we're going through. So in terms of the minutes, item 6, are we happy with the minutes, or anybody any queries? No, we can approve those. So if we now move on to item 7, so the officers that are here for item 7, which is the performance monitoring, if you want to move in and wipe the appropriate
This says, yes, we've got 5 chairs, but it's Lee and Councillor Harland. It's James and Tim to be at the table the whole time. To be joined by Lee and Councillor Harland first. But if anybody
Councillor Harland here. Harland. Far be it from me to start dictating who is there. Councillor Harland, I think, is one of the. And Councillor Cooper, is Councillor Cooper here as well? Yeah. Two of the rather more important people. So, yeah, everybody's important, but if they're not here, then we can't hold them to account if they're not at the table. We'll call it the Civic Hall Tango or something like that. Okay, right. So if we can start from Councillor Harland and move around, if people can just introduce who they are. That's my
I think probably everybody knows who I am by now. Councillor Mary Harland, Executive Board Member for Communities.
Morning, everybody. Councillor Deborah Cooper, Exec Board Member for Resources.
Morning, everybody. Lee Hemsworth, Chief Officer for Community Hubs, Welfare and Business Support.
Good morning, Tim Rollett from the Council's Intelligence and Policy Service.
Morning, James Rogers, Director of Communities, Housing and Environment.
Morning, Chris Howley, Councillor for Wheatwood Ward.
Good morning, Councillor Anne Blackburn, Councillor for Farnley and Wortley. I think I'm off to the side. Councillor Dawn Collins, Member of Scrutiny and Councillor for Horsforth Wood.
Good morning, Councillor Trish Smith, representing Putty Ward.
Councillor. Oh, that's not embarrassing.
Right.
Rebecca Alice Atherton, Scrutiny Advisor.
The question is, which councillor has now been unseated? That's the Councillor Barry Anderson. I'm the chair of the Scrutiny Board.
Councillor Pauline Graham, Crossgates and Winmore Ward, and Becky, you're more than welcome to join us.
Yeah, come to the dark side. Councillor Angela Gabriel, Beeston and Holbeck Ward.
Councillor Kaylee Brooks, Little London and Woodhouse Ward.
Councillor Denise Reagan, good morning, from Bermondsey and Richmond Hill Ward.
Good morning, Councillor Morale Midgley, Kippax and Methley Ward.
And good morning, it's Councillor Rebecca Cholwood from Moortown Ward.
Good morning from me, it's Councillor Kevin Ritchie, Bramley and Stanley Ward.
Good morning, Councillor David Jenkins from Kellyback and Seacroft Ward.
Thank you all very much. Right, what I'm going to do now is I'm making the presumption that everyone has had the opportunity to read through the report. I'm now going to go through the report section by section. So in terms of housing, that's pages 1 to 11. Anyone got any questions they would like to ask? Councillor Howley.
Thank you, Chair. I don't know whether I should apologise for quoting a specific incident, but I think it's relevant. I have in my ward a homeless family, special needs, banded top of A, have come in ranked number 1 on 3 properties. The first one, I think, dating back to October, and there is still no movement in their case. I spoke to Housing this week, and they said there's no progress whatsoever. I am concerned that such cases aren't covered by these metrics. I'm also concerned that I'm assuming we've got, you know, staff constraints, resource constraints, as we always tend to do at the moment. And I'm concerned that this kind of incident and backlogs in the system are going to increase, and they're not going to be captured in these numbers. So I'd be interested to hear some comfort on that if I can. Thank you.
That's it.
Is that better? Yeah, Gerard Tinsdale, Acting Chief Officer, Housing. Yeah, thank you, Councillor. I think what you were asking there is, I think you said your constituent at the top of the shortlist for a property and there was a delay in them moving in. Is that where you was going with the question?
3.
With 3 of them, yeah. I think in the report it covers some of the detail we've got around the number of voids that we've got floating through the system at the moment. They have increased quite considerably over the last 18 months with the pandemic. All those properties are allocated, they're just working through the systems. It is unfortunately taking us a little bit longer for people to move in. What we are though doing, Council, is where we've got vulnerable customers living in challenging circumstances, we are looking at ways where we can move them in much quicker and actually carry out repairs around them once they've moved into the property. But I guess in terms of the 3 cases that you're mentioning, without having detail, I can't really comment much further on them. If you want to share them with me, I can certainly have a look at them and feedback after this meeting.
Thank you. I'll do that.
Thank you. In terms of the disrepair claims, which I think is on page 10 of the report, are most of these through these claims companies that are coming forward, and are they in clusters in particular areas indicating that sort of activity?
I'm sorry, Chair, just swapped in there. Adam Crampton, Head of Property Management for Housing. We do see trends in certain areas where what we refer to as claims farmers do target certain areas within the city. And we do have kind of communication strategies to work with customers on that. It remains the case that where customers have outstanding repairs or repairs that we're not aware of, the most efficient way for those to be dealt with is via the council and coming to us and talking to the council. Unfortunately, there are some less than scrupulous activities undertaken by some of these claims farmers, and we have had some recent successes in dealing with some of those, but it does remain the case that there are targeted areas, and we're trying to kind of preempt some of those rather than react to them, but by its very nature, it does sometimes remain the case that we do need to react, and like I said, we do have some strategies in place to do so.
This is about private sector and access to private sector. It's like on the inspection side and licensing. So one of the problems for constituents is being able to access private rented properties, even though the council provides bonds and maybe the first month's rent. The problem is that many landlords require a guarantor. So what can the council do about negotiating that problem?
We're quite used to having to have those conversations with private landlords. I mean, what we will do on top of helping with the bond, for example, it's not necessarily a guarantor in the same way that somebody would normally sign up for a private rented property, but we can give assurances to the landlords in certain circumstances, not all cases, that, for example, we would cover any costs in terms of damage to the property should they suffer any problems in the future. And in some instances, landlords will work with us then if they've got the support from us as a council. And it's not just the financial support, council, it's about having those conversations with landlords so that they understand that we're going to be supporting that tenant so that they can maintain that tenancy as well, not just the bill side, but the behaviour and everything else. And I think the landlords that we're working with, they've got confidence in us now as a service to be able to do that. But it's something that we're continually trying to grow as a service.
Any other things on housing? Yes.
So this is about the right to buy, and I just wondered if, like some councils, like Leicester, I think, has declared a housing emergency. Well, I don't think we're quite in that position, but could you, in Wales, they've abandoned the right to buy, and I just wonder to what extent you think that the right to buy in Leeds has badly affected the access to housing.
I don't think that's.
Is it?
Sorry, Chair, I don't think that's a question for an officer to respond.
I would have passed that to Councillor Rafiq if he had been present. I mean, Councillor Cooper, far be it from me to pass bucks and hospital passes through. You used to have this portfolio. You're also deputy leader of the council. Do you want to give?
I'm happy to respond, Chair, as I'm sure you would have understood. I don't think it's relevant for an officer to pass judgment on a political policy, really. So, you know, and there is no doubt that that the council are losing a number of houses through right to buy has an impact on the council's ability then to provide housing further to other people who are in need of that housing. Now, I'm sure Scrutiny Board members are also aware of the ambitious and extensive council house build programme that the council are doing as well. But we can't build out as fast and build back the number as fast as we are losing the stock over. And indeed, the private rented sector has overtaken the number of properties now in the city that the local authorities have to let. It's a really good job, in my view, that we've got such a brilliant housing team that's led by James and Jez and everybody that works in it, that manage to juggle all of these things to ensure that we do get the best we possibly can for our residents who are in need of housing. And their work with the private sector is outstanding to ensure that, that there is availability, that we do, have the ability to inspect those as well, and also to be able to guide residents through that process and offer bonds and so on as much as we can help them while they're waiting for local authority or housing association properties, Chair.
Thank you. Anyone, any other questions? Yes, Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. I just wondered how the new contract with Mears is going in the north and west of the city, and whether there are any metrics available to us on that, please. Thank you.
Yep, thanks, Councillor Smith. For members who aren't necessarily as close to it, the new contract with the Mears went live on the 1st of October. I think I spoke at the last board about the fact that that represented obviously a continuation of the contractor in the shape of Mears, but very different in terms of the specifications and contract terms of the new contract. Obviously, 3 months in, we are still in the mobilisation phase of the contract and obviously operating in an extremely challenging environment. But progress and the level of performance is where we would like it to be at the moment. Obviously, we remain in recovery phase as far as the COVID pandemic is concerned. And as such, a number of our contractual KPIs remain suspended, specifically things like repairs completed within target, because we know non-essential repairs are taking longer to complete. And while we do monitor it, the contractual metrics are currently suspended. What we are seeing is significant progress in terms of backlog, in terms of repairs and voids, particularly in the west of the city, which is pleasing. And like I say, specifically with it being such a challenging environment at the moment. So early doors, Councillor Smith, but very much on the track that we hoped it would be.
Thank you, Adam. Just a little quick comeback. How long do you envision the suspension of the metrics for? I mean, I know it's a little bit open-ended because we're only just coming out of the other side of the pandemic, etc. And I know that there are a lot of difficulties. But obviously, it's a new contract, and we need to be, we need to be on top of them based on previous difficulties, shall we say? Thank you.
No, thank you. And just for your reassurance, I absolutely assure you that performance is closely monitored. It's things like the deductions that are currently suspended. We do anticipate that we'll be reintroducing all the performance metrics from the 1st of April, obviously representing the start of the next financial year.
Thank you, Adam.
Okay, on item 13 about unauthorised encampments, in the light of the police bill, this may be a political question as well in a way. In the light of the police bill, what steps are being made to secure negotiated stopping places for travellers in the city?
Thank you, Councillor. A couple of points there. One of the things that we're looking at is trying to expand on the number of permanent sites that we've got in the city. There's a number of sites that are being identified in the site allocation plan that we're working through now. We've reintroduced a board around about 3 months ago to work on that and looking at a couple of parts of the city where we think that might be useful. In terms of negotiated stopping, it kind of falls into two areas there. I mean, where we have travellers in the city in particular areas, we may consider wherever they are, to be a negotiated stop in sight, rather than take any type of action through the courts to take possession or work with partners in the police to move the sites on. Separate to that, we are looking at potentially a number of sites within Leeds where we could potentially direct groups and use as negotiated stopping sites. And a couple of members have already come forward with a few suggestions of areas that we can look at.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm relating to number 8 on page, I think it's page 4. Yes, page 4. Around empty homes. Now, yes, it gives us the up-to-date details there, but the fact is, of course, we all have many people that are waiting for flats and houses. And when I look in my ward, there's a lot now that are just waiting, I think, to be checked over. And yet, so even though I understand the current circumstances, the fact is that can we do something about trying to get the figure, the percentage figure, upwards from certainly when it was at the last scrutiny? Because as I said, you walk around and you see places that's boarded up, and when I ask, oh yes, well, it's void, it's void. We need to get, what I'm asking for is for us to get the percentage of homes put back in order so we can get people in them. We need to be doing that urgently. So can we do a bit more on that, please?
Mr. Tinsdale.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor, I think the figures you're looking at in the report, they refer to all empty homes, but I think your question was more around our void properties, the social housing stock that we're responsible for. And
can I just say, yes, that's correct, but I've related to the previous scrutiny report where percentages were there as well of houses and flats in void, and the percentage was high. So can you give me what the percentage is now? Because the percentage was high. Has it come down or has it not? Because the percentage was too high last time.
In terms of the accurate, Mr. Rollett's noting, vigorously writing notes down, so he'll make sure that that's on future ones.
Yeah, the percentage is still high, Councillor. Percentage of voids we've got is, from memory, just under 2% at this moment in time. We are actively working on reducing those numbers. We've got plans in place with both MERS and LBS to do that. MERS are on track to have their void numbers back to target by the end of the financial year, so by the end of March. And we've got plans in place with LBS to do similar. We're also working through a procurement exercise at this moment in time to bring additional contractors in to help with some of this backlog that we've got. And we expect to have them in the service hopefully March, beginning of April, and we're looking to have them possibly for around 6 months while we can just get back to similar numbers that we had prior to the start of the pandemic.
Thank you for allowing me to come in on this, and I was the former portfolio holder for housing, so I do have some substantial knowledge on this subject matter. But if I could just say that the void numbers and the percentages have increased, and it's purely because we've been through nearly 2 years of a pandemic, and we've actually had some restrictions on working practices of what's been allowed to be carried out in people's homes during that time due to public health restrictions and so on for much of those 2 years. I think that that the teams are really doing their best to try and ensure that voids are turned round as soon as possible during extremely challenging circumstances. And as we've heard yesterday, we're not through the end of the pandemic, but hopefully we can see the light at the end of the tunnel and start to change some of these percentages back to the into the positive, Chair.
Mr. Blackburn.
Yes, I appreciate what Councillor Cooper says, but I did refer to the last scrutiny report. I'm not talking about since COVID started. I'm going back to the last scrutiny report and the percentage then, from then to now. And so just to clarify, that's what you know, that's what I'm referring to. And the percentage, so all I'm saying is I'm pleased what's being stated, that we're going to get some extra help, because as we all know, things are desperate out there for people.
Right. Can we get, in that case, can we just get a note sent to Becky, who will then distribute it to all members, just setting out that information? It seems perfectly sensible to ask for it. So if we can get that and we can pass it out and we can then comment accordingly.
Can I just clarify? I perfectly understood what Councillor Blackburn was saying from the last scrutiny report to now. I was explaining the extenuating circumstances that we are still under at this point in time.
To pages 12 to 19. Thank you to the housing people, by the way. Thank you for your is community hubs and welfare. And on my record, it's Lee Hemsworth and Councillor Harland who will, I think Councillor Cooper will be back in again in a minute. So if Councillor Cooper wants to stay there, she can, because okay, so anything on pages 12 to 19 on the community hubs? Anybody got any questions? Councillor Blackburn.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, relating to, yes, hubs in buildings have reopened. My concern is that in my ward, whilst we have the housing building there and some staff have started going back in there, that building no longer has the public going in with concerns. And this was before COVID. We started with a minibus doing certain days. That only happened twice before COVID started. But when I keep asking, the buses of them being used to try and encourage people to have jabs, which, you know, is a good thing. I'm not complaining about that so much. But the fact is that my ward are not covered with a community hub at the moment. There's others that they could get a bus to, but there again, I don't see why. Well, really what I'm asking is, when can we get these buses back, or what are we going to do about rectifying the situation? Because I keep getting complaints, rightly so. And so can you answer me that one, please?
I can.
Mr. Hemsworth.
Yeah, as Councillor Blackburn said, a number of the buses are used for the vaccine. So they haven't been used as hubs. And certainly during the main lockdown, it was difficult for us to use it from a social distancing perspective and things like that. But I'll check and I will get back to you, Councillor Blackburn, because my understanding is that we have a mobile hub operational from the beginning of January. So it should be coming out to you all, but I will pick that up and I will get somebody to contact you and let you know what's what, because I know we've got one that if it's not out and about already, it's due to be out and about very shortly.
You want to come back again?
Yes, coming back. In that case, why have councillors not been informed? Because I've mentioned this often enough. I keep asking, and what I've been told is, well, the buses are being used. I've asked health as well, and they've told me the buses. As I wish to point out, I have no problem, certainly within the epidemic, about getting people jabbed, and that's fair enough. I think everybody understands that. But now we're coming out of it. If you should be getting in touch with councillors and telling us. I'm pleased if they are starting again, but most certainly you should be telling us.
Yes, as I said, I will find out and come back to you on that. But like I say, I don't know. The plan was to get it up and running during January, so I'm not 100% sure whether it's out there. I thought it was, and I think it is, but I don't know for your particular ward. I haven't got that detail, so I will get that and come back to you.
You can get it to her, that's fine. Right, I've got Councillor Ritchie, then Councillor Smith, then Councillor Gabriel. So Councillor Ritchie first.
Thank you. Mine's more of a comment, and just to say, and I am, people will be aware that if I think something's going wrong, I'll say it, you know, without a doubt. But actually, I think this is the exemplar service in the council. Absolutely, you deliver outcomes with compassion and care. And most of the cases that come to me aren't people, because a lot of cases what we get is when systems have failed, but it's people who aren't engaged with the service, perhaps don't know about it. And you always deliver quick responses, good outcomes for people, really difficult times. So thank you for what you do, and please keep it up. And other departments learn how they respond and deal with things, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Mine's kind of following on from Councillor Ritchie in a way. I was rather privileged to be able to put an event on at one of our community centres last August, and we had the free school meals service delivered in 4 of the 5 days, which was a fantastic thing for us, and that was appreciated at very short notice. Thank you. The other thing that I wanted to say is we have some really great schemes out there that we can really make a difference to our residents with, and I don't think we shout about them enough. I don't think the residents are aware of them, and I wondered if there was some way of actually getting even more information out there. I know I've had a couple of pieces of casework this week where people are asking me what's available to help them with the fuel crisis at the moment. And I know that there are things out there, and I've given them that information, but I wonder whether there is any scope to actually get that information out there to the residents, please. Thank you.
Mr. Hemsworth.
Yeah, we can certainly pick that up. We have obviously a number of mechanisms for doing that, but we can, look into that and look to see what we can do more with to get those programs out, because as Councillor Smith said, there are a number of really good ones.
Thank you.
Councillor Gabriel.
Thank you. Mine's on item 23, helping people into work. We've had an officer contact the Beeston and Holbeck councillors asking for mice money because they're running a course in one of the council buildings, and they're asking us for rent to pay the council for the council building. And I wonder why that's happening. So they're saying they're being charged £100 for rent, and then for food and drink. And why are we expected to give mice money to get the people to get these facilities they need? And they're paying it council, it's St Matthew's council buildings. So we're giving them mice money to give to the council and they should be charging them. If we're providing training in one of our buildings, we shouldn't be charging them. I can understand if they want money for tea and coffee or trips like that, but why are we paying for them to, have rent in our own buildings? Yes, Alison Fenton.
I know we believe in the circular economy. That's maybe taking it a little bit too far.
Well, it is, but I think it's happening all over because you're saying the same.
That said, Mr. Hemsworth.
Yeah, I'm happy to look into them if you can send me the specifics. Is it St Matthew's Church?
St Matthew Community Centre. And
Right.
Alison Fenton is the officer that's requesting the money. She was paid last year, and this year she's come back asking for £800.
Okay, Mr. Roger.
We can take it away and look into it, but this will be related to the community centres lettings policy, which members have previously agreed. And members will be aware that we've got 3 different rates, and the lowest rate, which I think is it £2.50 per hour or something is the minimum rate that we charge everybody. But we can get back to you specifics, Councillor Gabriel, but that's what it will relate to.
It's the fact that she's getting a budget to put this course on, then why ain't she getting a budget from the rent and for the food? And if they want to go on trips, why is she having to scrape round asking for mice money? It should be properly funded.
Okay, that's a slightly different issue. So yeah, we'll take that away and come back.
You obviously write the report so well that nobody's got any questions to to challenge you on. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Now, safer, stronger communities.
You've got Councillor Harland here indicating to come in.
Sorry. You need binoculars from down here to see what's happening at the top end.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to thank you for your positive comments, because I think in the report that comes later on, you'll see exactly what this team have had to deal with and how they've dealt with it over the last couple of years. But thank you for your comments.
Thank you. Thank you. You can go back again, Paul, now. Okay, so we're now on pages 20 to 31. Anybody got any comments on pages 20 to 31? Well, in that case, Councillor Cooper, do you want to sum up or say anything or make any comment?
Well, thank you. And I know that Scrutiny has been involved in a number of these matters that are reported in this particular report, much more in depth as the year's gone on. So thank you for Scrutiny's involvement, and actually working together has ensured that things have been dealt with in the right way. So thanks, Chair, and thanks, members.
In that case, we're now on to environmental services on page 32. Councillor Howley.
Thank you, Chair. I have a number of questions on these, and if it's okay, I'll just run through them quickly. So you might want to take notes. On item 57, bin collection rates, I think two numbers would be really useful here if we could get them. And one is the percentage of collections that are actually on schedule rather than just made at all. So how many, I suppose, are missed, even if they are collected later? And how do these collections missed numbers translate into absolute numbers? How many households are missing and having the inconvenience of missed collections? So that's one. On 59, can we get absolute numbers on landfill? We've seen that numbers are below target, which is good. But where does that fit in with overall waste? I suppose percentage terms, absolute tonnage again would be useful there. And then I suppose more of a comment that the recycling figures are still very disappointing, even though they're improving. And we are way down the list nationally. And I suppose the general question is, what are we doing about it to really turn this one around? Thank you.
John, are you able to take them, or do you want Mr. Rogers? Are you able to take John? Right, do you want to introduce yourself first of all, John, as well?
Yeah, I'll just go very briefly on some key comments, and I'll let John come in terms of the detail. I mean, we've had lots of debates around what performance indicators to use for missed bins collections over the years, and many debates in the Scrutiny Board about that very issue. And we've always concluded that there's a lot of work being done nationally to develop a way in which you measure performance so that you can compare it with other authorities nationally. And that's the performance indicator that we've used now for as long as I can remember. And I would advise members that we continue to use that, because that does actually take account of all of the issues that we have to deal with on a day-to-day basis, and gives an opportunity to have a good performance indicator which is comparable with other authorities. But John might want to add a bit more onto that. In terms of landfill, I don't know if John's got the percentage, but we'll give you the percentage, but it's very low. You're talking by point something of a percent, I think now, or 2 or 3%, something of that nature. I don't know if, John, you've got the figure to hand, but it's virtually nothing, and that's because of the investment that we've made in the RERF and other things. And then on the recycling one, I mean, we acknowledge that the recycling target maybe isn't at the level we would all like to see, but actually we're not way behind everybody else in the country. If you actually look at where we fall against other authorities, we're probably about average. There are authorities that are doing better than us, absolutely, but there are authorities that actually maybe aren't performing as well as us as well. So we are performing averagely there compared to authorities. What we have, though, is sort of ambitions, obviously, to do much more on that, but that's very much tied into the National Waste Strategy and where government are in terms of national policy, which has been significantly delayed because of COVID for the last 2 or 3 years. So that is an ongoing ambition for us, but a challenge as well.
Wilmer, if you want to introduce yourself as well.
Thank you, Chair. John Woolmer, Acting Chief Officer for Environmental Services. Good morning. I'll just very quickly pick on to those points there, Councillor Howley. James has covered most of them, but in terms of the percentage of collections made on schedule, obviously that gets us into the realms of what's on schedule. You know, is it the day that it's scheduled to collect it within the 48 hours? We don't gather that information in terms of what's been collected on each day on the scheduled day, so it's difficult to provide that information to yourselves. We can have a look at that in terms of what we can provide outside of the meeting, and always have to look at that, but it won't be something that we collect across the city. How does the figure that we report translate into household numbers? Again, I can make sure I can circulate that through the committee. That's easy enough to do in terms of applying that percentage to the overall households that we collect from. And I can pick up with Tim in terms of making sure that's circulated, no problem with that. The landfill percentage is 0.6%. So 0.6% of waste collected in Leeds still goes to landfill. I can again quantify that in terms of tonnes through Tim. But as James said, that's extraordinarily low compared to most cities across the country, and is a result of a lot of investment we've put in place. And that's below what the target is, if you like, as well. So that's the percentage. And again, just to reiterate what James said around recycling figures, I'll probably just add one thing there as well. So it's very difficult. We've had this discussion at Scrutiny before as well around comparing councils across the UK, because there are different ways that recycling is measured, particularly, for instance, in Wales, where a lot of the high recycling towns and cities that are reported in, when you look at across the UK, they generally include the recycling material that's gathered at the bottom of the incinerators, what we call the bottom ash, into their figures, but we're not allowed to in England, so we don't cover that, and that's part of something we kind of dispute a bit with DEFRA around how recycling figures are constructed, because you know that's not captured anywhere at all. But yeah, that is material is gathered and recycled and reused. I'll leave it there. Thanks.
I've now got Councillor Collins, then Councillor Blackburn, then Councillor Graham, then Councillor Ritchie. So Councillor Collins first, please.
Thank you, Chair. I've got 3 sort of little questions, really, I think. The first was regarding the landfill. You mentioned the percentage is very low, but what actually pushes one of our contractors to actually use landfill? Is there a capacity issue somewhere? You know, why is it ever used? That was my first one. Secondly, are we looking at recycling any other materials? I mean, we'd had a quick chat before our meeting to say that fabric was a problem at the RERF. Is there anything in the pipeline for adding additional things to recycle? And the third one, which is probably more important, I've had concerns raised from residents that they're reporting things on the Leeds City Council website, particularly to do with fly tipping. They're given a reference number. They've been told that people will get back to them, but the communications seem to have gone completely. And those residents are concerned that they might have reported something in a part of the city that they don't frequently go to, and they don't know whether that fly tipping has been cleared. So is there a problem with communications regarding things that are reported online at the moment? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Collins. Thank you, Chair. I think probably in terms of the landfill, maybe the best thing, Chair, is to for me to provide that information again, possibly through yourselves, through Tim. I'm quite happy to look at the 0.6% and try and break that down for members to understand what that actually is. I can't give the response here in terms of the details, so that's probably the best way to deal with that. If that's okay, Chair. So I find that useful information. To a degree, James, I think, has covered the recycling of the materials in terms of our longer term ambition is to help with the government's own ambition to deliver through its resource and waste strategy. And we wait eagerly the results of the latest consultation around that, which we were told was due early 2022. There'll be some legal requirements within that strategy. So we've discussed this before again at Scrutiny, but that's likely to be the requirement to collect separately food collection and glass. So that's what we're anticipating to be a legal requirement, and the detail, as all councils are waiting across the country, is in how that will be funded. The government are committed to fully fund any additional requirements related to those waste streams. So we wait with detail on that, and that's going to have the biggest impact in terms of being able to push the recycling figure up more. We are doing, in the meantime, some work with Eunomia and RAP, which are environmental consultants, to look at analysing the current composition of what goes in the brown bit, sorry, the black bins at the moment, but also the carbon impact of the materials we collect in Leeds. And that's one of the key issues I think that we're all interested in going forward, is perhaps not obsessing so much about percentage in terms of tonnage of materials we collect, but actually which of the materials we should be collecting that will have the greatest most positive impact in terms of carbon reduction and climate change influence. So again, that's work that we're looking to do with those consultants I've mentioned, and we'll bring that information back, I'm sure, via Scrutiny as well in due course, and that'll help inform some of our decisions much better. In recycling figures, again, that's been touched on, but the reasons have been explained around that in terms of why they are around just below the 40% mark at the moment in terms of this performance reporting. In terms of the website, fly tipping, I'm quite happy, probably Councillor Collins, maybe I need to pick that up separately with you to understand the specifics of the cases. That always really helps for me to then look through and track and see what specifically has happened there. I'm not aware of a particular issue that should be influencing that. There always is the problem in terms of people reporting fly tipping, particularly through the website, and their expectations around what feedback they will get in terms of prosecution and investigations. The investigation prosecutions can take months, if not a year or so, to conclude. And it's not realistic for us to be updating every individual person that's reported every individual fly tip on progress on investigations. There may be something there we need to review in terms of the messages we give to people when they report things through the website, and therefore manage their expectations better in terms of thanking them for providing information, assuring that it'll be looked into, but leaving it at that, and to explain what the processes may be, but therefore explaining that it's not realistic for us to continually update people. But I will look into that if you've got particular examples you can provide with Councillor Collins, with pleasure.
I'll forward you the email that I got, John, but it may just be the statement that you make after the report has been made to say that they have a reference number, but there will be no further communications. So you're correct in what you're saying. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Collins.
Right, I've got Councillor Blackburn, Councillor Graham, Councillor Ritchie, Councillor Brooks, and then Councillor Smith. So it's Councillor Blackburn next.
Thank you, Chair. A few things here. The first one is to do with bin collection and residents phoning phoning in problems where their bins have not been collected. And I'm told by quite a few residents have been in touch that they ring up, and they're told to just leave a message and someone will get back to them. No one does. There's too many of these cases now where I'm getting that fed back to me. And I know you prefer people to do stuff online, but as I say, nearly every meeting I go to, we have to bear in mind not everybody has that facility. Not everybody has a building that they can go to, like a community hub, as I related to a few minutes ago, where they can go to use such a facility, and they ring up. And as I said, that's what they're getting back. My second matter is to do with vehicles blocking roads. Now, I accept that a lot of this is residents or nearby residents doing that. That is not the council's fault. But obviously, where that happens, the bin vehicles cannot get in, so the bins do not get emptied. Now, I remember before the pandemic that we were told there was a scheme going on for where such roads, where there was a regular occurrence of this, that it could be looked at about maybe doing some yellow lines or something. And I want to know when that will be restarted, please. And the third matter is to do with road closures. Now, where the council knows there's going to be a road closure due to gas or whatever highways, surely we should be taking that into line to do with refuse collection. Yet I've got a case where for 2 to 3 weeks, half this road is closed to do with the gas networks. And now something's been done because obviously a councillor's rang up about it. But needless to say, we should be bearing that in mind before it happens, because they have to give notice that it's going to happen. Yet it seems as if we're not quite up to date with that. And the information's out there. So again, that's my third matter. I'm sure we could all go on ages about this, but if I give you those three, I'd like a response, please.
Thank you, Councillor Blackburn. Thank you, Chair. Okay, in terms of the bin collection and phoning in problems, I'm sorry to hear that you've had reports of that. That's something I can speak to Lee and his team around in terms of the customer and contact centre who take those calls on behalf of the council and manage those. Again, we're always happy to look at individual cases where you can highlight them to us, because that will allow us to track through and see what's happened in those cases. I'd be surprised if people are being told to leave a message and someone will get back to you. Although, do you mean by that, councillor, there's a recorded message that says that, or they're being, you're right? Okay, but again, that's something I'll have to pick up separately with colleagues that manage that service. But again, we'd need specific examples of that. Would be really helpful. But we'll look into that. Vehicles blocking the roads, and I'm pleased to see that you recognise a lot of the time that it's the residents that are at fault. So a small number of residents, obviously. You're correct, Councillor Blackburn, that when I've reported and updated Scrutiny before on this, that there was a TRO scheme implemented phase 1 of that a while ago, and that was on the following consultation with individual ward members around regular hotspots and locations that we were experiencing problems accessing. There's a level of proof of and evidence that we need to provide for highways to enable TROs to be put in place. So it's not something we can just do lightly. There has to be a real evidence that bins are regularly being missed at those locations, and that has been implemented. So we're ready to move on to phase 2 of that, and would always welcome suggestions from members. Like if you've got particular locations where you feel that there is a regular miss happening, then the measures that we're putting in place, such as writing to residents and trying to get some routes put on smaller wagons where that's not working, and you feel that a yellow line solution is the right one, and that's something you support, then please do let us know. And we'll be in touch with members reasonably soon around that phase 2 of the TRO, once I've had the opportunity to discuss that now with highways. But where it has been introduced so far, we feel it has made quite an impact in those areas, and not eradicating problems. It really has reduced the number of problems. And I think you'll see that in terms of end of day reports. There is still a lot of locations where problems happen, but where we've introduced TROs, they seem to have had the desired effect, generally speaking. Road closures caused by things such as gas works, etc. Yes, we do work as close as we can with highways colleagues around that. We get the list, as I'm sure a lot of members do, around the planned works in areas and work on them. You'll know yourselves as members the scale of which the number of road closures and road works there are at any given time across the city is huge, and by and large I think we successfully manage that. But of course there are occasions when that breaks down. A lot of the time that isn't necessarily because we've not planned for it or had the conversation, been aware. But again, you as members will be as aware as anyone on this that the works that happen don't often happen in the way that they've been planned for legitimate reasons most of the time, in terms of weather or issues that they come across in the works themselves, or timing of such like. So often it can be difficult for us, because where a closure may be planned to start on Wednesday at 9 o'clock, it doesn't start till Friday at 12 o'clock, and so that often that's the way the issues cause us the most problems. But what we do is make sure we work where we can with the contractors involved. We speak to those site contractors in terms of trying to pull out bins where they can, and we'll always return to recover bins and put in solutions where we can. But I acknowledge that in a city Leeds' size, there will be a number of times when that doesn't always work. Well, I think by and large we get that right.
Thank you, Chair. And I think, Chair, we had this discussion at the last meeting when Councillor Blackburn raised about the bin collections. I would have thought, hopefully, Councillor Blackburn, that you would have got that sorted by now. And I'm going to thank you again, John, and your team. I did thank you at the working group, and I had a lady come out to me in the Kennellies to make sure that I passed it on to the manager of the bin collections of the service that they get there. We do get missed bins, and when reported, they are dealt with more or less straight away. And I'm glad, Councillor Blackburn, you raised again about the roads being blocked, because it's a lot of the residents, the way they park the cars, that stops the bins. So it's not the bin collection. So we have to look at it all the way around. And the team have worked hard across the city during this pandemic. So, John, would you please thank your team? And thank you.
Councillor Ritchie, then Councillor Brooks, then Councillor Smith. So Councillor Ritchie.
Thanks. I've got a few things. Firstly, on bins, I think there's probably a bit of a disparity across the city in terms of how recoveries are done. But what I did suggest is that you appoint someone in an area who's on days who can sort of take ownership of cases. Now, finally achieved that in my ward, which I'm really grateful for, and that has improved things. So Mr. Fowler, I think, has been picking up my inquiries, which is why I've been able to take you off the CC list, John, not because they're not happening, and that's improved things. So I think if you don't already, roll that out, because that member's inbox with the team leader referral doesn't always work. It didn't work for me anyway, but I take Councillor Pauline's comments that it has worked for her, which is great. So that's the first thing. The second thing, on the street cleanliness, I think it's bullet point 60. I think you missed an opportunity, John, to praise the contribution of the volunteers of Litter Free Leeds, which I know you're fully engaged with, because I think you attended their last 3 meetings, I joined for one of them. So all the volunteers across the city, the local groups, I've got one in my own ward, so I've got a bit of an interest there. But I think we should perhaps reflect that in the contribution they've made, particularly in the pandemic. And that's been with the support of the team as well, picking up the purple bags, supporting through litter pickers and what have you. But that's a good news story, and it'd be nice to see that reflected. We're going to end out with of this report now. Parks. Oh, have we? Right. Well, I'll leave that. But
now, as far as parks are concerned, Councillor Reif isn't available, but Councillor Regan has been working exceptionally close on that side. So she's willing to try and answer questions and become dual-hatted if people want to do so.
That's good. Right. Okay. Well, on my parks, this is a criticism for the service, and the parks repairs of play equipment is just not good enough. I've got an inquiry up live at the moment, and it's embarrassing for members, actually. I described it as pulling teeth. I report something, I don't get feedback when it's been done, and then I get told something else is wrong. So we're told there are weekly inspections. Why aren't these things being dealt with or reported to us and dealt with quickly? Because in some areas, I know how funding for parks works, Section 106, etc. So some areas get more than others. But if we can't do the basic repairs in those areas that aren't getting the capital money, we're getting it badly wrong. And you can link it to the Best City Ambition, which is coming up later, where there's a commitment for community parks and what have you. So that is my constructive criticism on parks. And then finally, parking permits, something I've raised, and I think there's, again, some inconsistencies, or there has been, in how these schemes are implemented. I pointed out in Wetherby a scheme that seems to be in operation where they've got off-street parking, and I've been told continually one of the criteria is that if you've got driveways off-street parking, you're not eligible for parking permits. And I've now discovered another one in Farsley that's also got off-street parking. It's got a parking permit. So I've got a direct question. I've got an inquiry that's still hasn't had a response since before Christmas. Of the 137 parking permit schemes, how many have got off-street parking available, and why have they been granted a parking permit scheme? So that's a direct question to finish. Thank you.
Roughly in order. So, John, is there anything you want to add in respect of the cleansing and refuse collection issues that were raised?
Just briefly, I thank you for the acknowledgement around Anthony Fowler's appointment and the work he's doing to try and work with yourselves and a number of other councillors more closely and directly, and completely acknowledge the issues that the current system faces. I'd just repeat really that what I've mentioned before at Scrutiny around the longer term solutions are there in terms of the service and route review, looking at how we restructure and how we improve the culture of the service in terms of being more responsive to councillors and be structured the way it does that. And if you remember, the route review itself will create routes that are more coterminous with community committees and allow us to have a management and a supervisory structure that better supports that. So I'm frustrated as members are in terms of us having to delay that inevitably because of the COVID situation. And also the good news is we'll move into our new citywide office and depot in looks like April, May time this year. And I keep pointing that out because that'll make a massive impact in terms of being able to manage the service as one and get a consistency of approach across how we deal with things. So thank you for that. I'm glad that's starting to work. Street cleanliness issue, I absolutely totally agree, Councillor Hitchin, and I'm always a little bit. I've had this conversation with Litter Free Leaders, as you say, I actively engage with them and support them, and what they do is fantastic across the city. But we always have this conversation around, I'm also conscious of being, I don't want to present them as kind of too much part of the solution to excuse the council from doing stuff, if that makes sense. I'm really conscious of being sensitive to that in terms of reflecting their work in what we do. So I think you're right on reflection. It's something carefully worded to acknowledge the contribution they've made. probably would be a good idea. But it's something we're looking at in terms of working more closely with them this year, perhaps looking at something around some sort of campaign with them. But I just want to make that point really, it's difficult. I don't want them to ever think that what they're doing is therefore means we don't have to do anything in that area, and they're replacing and taking out our role away. So just want to strike that balance really. And the other two issues, perhaps James, I don't know if
Certainly do, and I think if things that James can't answer at this moment in time, we'll take it away and ask Sean Flesher to look at the situations.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I mean, very, very briefly, I think you make a valid point in terms of playgrounds, and I'll ask somebody in the Parks leadership team to speak to direct and just talk that through, what the issues are that you're currently experiencing, and see what we can do. On the parking permits, I don't have that level of detail clearly with me, but if you send me the email that you've sent to the team, I'll pick it up and make sure you get a fulsome response.
Thanks, Chair. I'm still on environmental services. So I think, first of all, I'd like to echo Councillor Graham's thanks to bin crews for all the work that they've done and their commitment. So, I mean, it mentions at one point nearly 50% of staff are either shielding, self-isolating or absent due to the virus. I was just wondering what the current sick and self-isolating rate is. And I think secondly, I'd just like to quickly thank you personally, John, for engaging with me and with residents quite actively, looking at very specific local issues around environmental issues, including bins and collections and things. I know that it's going to be a while until it can be worked out and things, but residents are really appreciative of that. So I just wanted to put that on record. Thank you.
To respond, John?
Thank you, Councillor.
Being a shrinking violet.
Yeah. No, thanks for that. And yeah, in particular, the issues around the sort of Headingley, Hyde Park, Woodhouse, Little London areas are well documented in terms of the service needing to sort of do something a bit different in those areas to better meet those needs. And that's something that the route review, the service review will definitely be prioritising in terms of its objectives. And I look forward to working with members across that area on those solutions. And thanks for that.
Also, how many people are off sick at the moment? Sorry.
Yes, apologies. Yeah. So yeah, we're seeing some light at the end of the tunnel with that now in across the service, both in refuse and in the clean neighbourhoods, which obviously referred to. So whereas we were looking at in terms of COVID-related absences specifically, around 10 to 12% of the workforce a week or two ago, that's reducing to about 5-6% now this week. So definitely some sort of an improvement in that in terms of therefore the availability of the resources available to deliver the service. There is another issue, and I think it's just worth mentioning that and it'll be not just in our services, across other services in private and public sector, I presume, is the issue of sickness as well. And I think that's playing out a lot. And I've seen headlines from Royal Mail and other large organisations. And I think that's something that for us to really focus and continue to focus on in the next few months is the well-being of staff, the mental health, their well-being, their exhaustion, the fact they're going to be picking up other things and other sickness and such like, and for us to be supportive in that and not being something that we're not recognising. So that's the challenge, I think, myself for the services over the next few months. But the news is good in terms of the resources are certainly more available to us now than they've been the last 2 or 3 weeks, certainly.
I've got Councillor Smith and then Councillor Howley, and then unless there's anybody else, I'll be drawing this item to a close.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a couple of points. Obviously, we all know about problems with the refuge service and the difficulties that they faced and our residents have faced as a result. But I believe they're coming, they're being resolved. They're getting better. I'd like to put on thanks on record my thanks for the Cleaner Neighbourhoods team in our area in particular. I think they've been absolutely fantastic. Our litter-free groups have been absolutely brilliant as well, and I think that's all helped in terms of giving a far better feel to the area. I think is probably the way. There's a feel of everybody's helping everybody else. There's a feel that everything's improving, and that's a very positive thing. I've got a couple of things points to make on parks, which I know Sean's not here, sadly. So I don't know whether these can be taken away and brought back at another time, but or given a written response. But the Love Leeds Parks is a fantastic initiative. I think that's very, very positive. I'd urge that body to be used more widely in the wards with little or no Section 106 money in an attempt to bring those parks in those areas up to the Leeds Quality Park standard. I know other areas have 106 money that they can use, and we've all seen the value of the parks and green spaces over recent years, and everybody deserves a chance of a good quality park. So I think that could be a very good vehicle to allow the city to lift all of its parks and green spaces. I agree with Councillor Ritchie on equipment repairs, renewals and upgrades to green spaces that are paid for by Section 106 seem to be very slow to come together. And I would also like to put a question to parks about the potential of an ageing workforce. I think they're in danger of sort of having a lot of retirements and a lot of sickness. I know they've suffered with a lot of shielding and clinically extremely vulnerable workforce. So I'd like to know what they're doing to address that. Thank you.
James, do you want to answer them just now, or do you want to just send replies back along?
I'll answer it now, Chair, if that's okay. I think in terms of the ambition for our parks and green spaces that we have in the vision, then Executive Board last month signed off a 10-year green and parks strategy for the city, which this Scrutiny Board helpfully contributed to, and that's ambitious in its vision for parks and green spaces within the city. So that will drive our work and our ambition looking forward, which I think is particularly exciting. I note the comments around the playgrounds, which I'll take back in the context of Councillor Ritchie's comment. And in terms of the ageing workforce, I think you're right to raise that, and it's something that we recognised some time ago. And 3 or 4 years ago, we decided that one of the best ways of responding to that would be to have an apprenticeship scheme where we got a large number of young people engaged in the park service coming in at much younger. So we're already starting to see a change in the sort of age demographics within that service, which was really positive, and we'll continue to do that. So most vacancies which occur in sort of parks operations will be filled by apprentices, have been in the last 2 or 3 years, and we'll be looking forward.
Thank you, James.
Thank you, Chair. I do have some questions and comments on parks, so I'm very happy for these to be taken away if that's better, or easier to deal with. First off, a comment on really welcoming the change in mowing regime around roads. And I'm hopeful, we do get some pushback from residents on this, but it is good for the environment. I'm hopeful that that can be expanded further in the future. My first question on woodland creation, it would be great to see some output measures on the success of this rather than the input measures of what is being planted, and particularly, and I really hope it's better in other areas across the city, because in Wheatwood, this has been an absolute disaster. There are, I think, far more of the whips being taken out, removed, destroyed than are remaining for any significant period of time. So I wondered whether a change in strategy to enhance the success of that scheme is in order. And I think a starting point would be to try and improve the consultation with residents there. And then my other question, again, happy to be taken away. Are we actively looking to reduce use of herbicides, particularly glyphosate-based herbicides, across the council? Because again, it's an area that I continue to get concerns and complaints on. Thank you very much.
Mr. Rogers.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. In terms of the latter question, that is something that is uppermost in our minds, and it's something that we're working on. There's not necessarily an easy solution to it, but it's something that we are working on. I think in terms of the tree plant initiative, what I would say is I think if you look overall citywide, it's been extremely successful. And whilst we would always expect, because of the nature of planting whips and the nature of them, that you would get some failure rate. The failure rate was is currently within the tolerance that we would have expected. We do appreciate that in maybe some places it's maybe higher and in other places it's lower, and therefore we need to continue to work with local ward members to make sure we put them in the right place and obviously maximise the success and the growth of those whips into successful trees. And again, on the consultation point, we work very closely, obviously, with ward members and with local communities, and in most cases that's been really successful and a good collaborative working arrangement in place. But again, there have been issues, as you might expect, with the scale of what we're doing in some areas, so we'll continue to work with ward members to address any issues that arise.
In that case, I will now close down this particular item. Can I thank everyone who has attended and answered the questions today, and can also thank the board members for the broad range of questions that have been raised. So thank you very much on that one. If I can now move on to items 8 and 9 together, which is the financial health monitoring and the initial budget proposals. So if those now, in order to try and move this particular item on, because we did benefit from having a working group some weeks ago, so there is some knowledge already within the group. But if I could invite Mr. Evans and the other guest who came just to introduce themselves, and then I'll try and find a way.
Neil Evans, Director of Resources.
In order to try and move this, if anyone's got any questions about the financial health monitoring, they can ask those in a minute. So I'm not precluding that. But as far as the budget proposals are concerned, Mr. Evans, can you just briefly outline any changes there have been to the budget proposals from the last time we met, in terms of, because since then we've had the announcement of the settlement, and I know that there's been one or two other tweaks that have had to be introduced. So can you briefly outline those for us, please?
There haven't been any changes to the proposals in terms of what's in front of you today from Resources.
From members, anybody any questions either on the budget proposals or on the state of the accounts to date? Anybody any questions they would like to raise? If not, we did have a report that's on page 195 of our papers, which sets out the basis of the working group's discussions. Are we happy to endorse that as our submission to the joint scrutiny paper going forward? On that basis, then, I'm sorry that to the two finance officers who've come along, sat patiently listening to the debate that's taken place, but hopefully you found it as enthralling as I did, who was chairing the meeting, and you've now learned a lot more about how the council operate. But can I thank you both very much, and can I also thank your teams as well for the help and support that they've given to a number of us. Honestly, that's not my stomach. I don't know where that's coming from, but thank you for the effort that you've given to the scrutiny chairs and to the scrutiny boards, and also to a number of us who've been raising specific queries. I spent yesterday afternoon having a long chat with Mr. Tinsdale about the housing revenue account, so I'm now better informed as far as that's concerned. So thank you all very much, and I do apologise for you not being here for long. Thank you. If I can now, in that case, move on to, I'm missing out item 10 just now because I gave Simon due notice that I would be bringing forward item 11. Now, I'm bringing forward item 11 for a number of reasons. One is we've got a number of external guests, but also I want to make sure that we get as much chance to discuss this as we possibly can, because I don't want any short circuiting of it. And I am conscious of that time is going on. So that's the reason I've made that decision.
Thank you, Chair. I don't think you need me for the next two items, do you? So
Thank you. All right. So if we can start, well, we'll do it from Lee back up again, because I think by the time we get the other people sorted out. So Lee, can you just reintroduce yourself and then we'll go up the table.
Yes. Thank you, Chair. Lee Hemsworth, Chief Officer for Community Hubs Welfare and Business Support.
Diane Lyons from Citizens Advice Leeds.
Rebecca Owen, DWP.
And welcome to our guests. So we've got this report, which hopefully members have had a chance to read. But Lee, can you just briefly introduce the report that we've got here? We've got a presentation as it's jumping around on the screen. There we are. So if you can just briefly outline the report, thank you.
Yes, certainly. Thank you all. I mean, it's a very detailed report. There's a lot of info in there. It covers a lot of ground, as you can appreciate. So we've pulled together a short presentation to pull out the main points of that. Hopefully you can see that. For some reason, it's not rendering on the screen very well.
Yeah.
I don't know if that. I'll carry on anyway. So I will do a couple of slides at the beginning.
It's
around.
Okay, it's sorted now.
Good stuff around the councils, the work that the council's been doing. Then I'll hand over to Rebecca from DWP, and then pass that on to Diane, who will cover advice partner update, and then it'll come back to me, if that's okay. So I will start on this. So in terms of some of the headline statistics, obviously before I start, all the colleagues who are here today, plus a number of others, have obviously been working together for a significant number of years around tackling financial inclusion in Leeds. And the work really started in 2003. So we're a year away from 20 years of that work. And the city is held up nationally as a city of best practice in terms of its approach to financial inclusion. That's largely, well, wholly down to the partnership working that goes on. And we obviously do, a lot of our work is based on building on knowledge and research that's been undertaken both nationally and also the research that we do ourselves. And I think it's worth here that obviously even before COVID and the pandemic, the scale of challenge was significant. And there were 174,000 people in Leeds who lived in relative poverty prior to the pandemic. And from our local research in 2018, we highlighted that households were less resilient and worse prepared for an external financial shock than they were back in 2004. And it's important to know that during the pandemic, obviously things were significantly, the pressure was put on to low income households. And I think where we find ourselves now is that certainly households and individuals who are struggling financially are much less resilient than even probably they were back in 2018, pre-pandemic. And the impact of relatively small changes is pushing other people in. So, you know, we talk about the fuel price increases or food price increases or things like that, and they're having a big impact. So, you know, we highlight there that obviously during the pandemic, there was a lot of things put in place to help people, but that a number of those things have gone by the wayside now and have been stopped. Plus you've got that coupled with increasing household bills and fuel prices, etc., and obviously inflation now, which is driving that even more. So since 2021, it's been much more intensified, and we've put some figures on there in terms of where we are. So I've reflected on the 175,000 people living in relative poverty in Leeds. That's 22% of the population. Over 72,000 claiming universal credit in Leeds compared to 33,000 in February 2020. And obviously there during the pandemic, we delivered nearly just over 153,000 food parcels were given out via food aid providers. That's an 860% increase on the previous year. In terms of the activities, we've covered here the work of the financial inclusion team, and that team do a significant amount of work in the city, but they do it in coordination and cooperation, working with a number of partners and other services in the council. They very much have a focus on tackling poverty through increasing access to affordable financial services, access to free, independent and accredited advice, and obviously working to improve financial well-being. And they operate very much from a strong evidence base. So a number of, well, virtually everything that team does is based on research that's undertaken. We often go from the research to piloting things to it becoming mainstream through what we do. There's a couple of examples there of the work that team does. So coordinates the financial inclusion steering group, and that's a cross-city partnership group that's been operational since 2004, since this work started. They also coordinate the Money Information Centre resource, which is the website that has everything that happens in the city around financial inclusion and all the links and things like that. It's well worth having a look at if you haven't looked at that. They coordinate the Healthy Holiday projects, and obviously within that support the Leeds School Uniform Exchange. They're currently working on reviewing the local welfare support scheme, and we've brought a report, I think, to the last Scrutiny board about that. And within that, piloting a cash first option, working with Trussell Trust on that pilot. They also have coordinated city's response to the Treasury's breathing space scheme that was introduced last year. They do a lot of work in terms of through working with Leeds Credit Union and housing, and obviously they're key to doing the work around gambling related harm. In terms of sort of some of the key activities that they've been involved with, certainly over the past 2 years, very much focused around sort of COVID response. So there's a number of things there, and these are the sort of short-term government funded schemes. So they're all listed there. Within the city, we've had the amount of money that's come in through these schemes is about 26 million. Over that period of time, split across these. And just to give you a feel for some of them, if I can do these in, I'll do Healthy Holidays first, because that's a scheme. So just over 23,000 children involved in that during summer and Easter. We're still evaluating the Christmas schemes on that. And just over 171,000 portions of food provided. We work with Leeds Community Foundation, schools, and through the community hubs to deliver those programmes. And I'm assuming members around the room are aware of a number of those things. We do target children that are on free school meals, but the scheme isn't directly, we can only target free school meals. It's not just for free school meals children. So we do a lot of work, and there's a long history in Leeds of us doing work around healthy holidays. So that was funded last year through DFE, and we got £3.8 million to deliver programmes over Easter, Christmas, and the summer. That's been extended now, so the funding's slightly reduced. I think it's 3.4 million we're going to get, but we'll get that for the next 3 years. So we are building on that programme and running that same scheme. So just to give you a feel, for over Christmas, we had 44 schools, 42 third sector organisations, and 12 community hubs, all who delivered some form of healthy holiday activity. Like I say, we're doing the Christmas evaluation on that now. In terms of test and trace support scheme, that's the self-isolation payments scheme. Again, there's been about 7.5 million there. There's been over 17,000 applications administered by the Benefits Service on that. And we do well. There's a main scheme, which I think I've mentioned before, and a discretionary scheme. Our discretionary scheme is very flexible. So on average, nationally, about 33% of applications are successful, whereas in Leeds it's 58%. So we do well in terms of administering and providing support through that scheme, and that's in place now until the end of March. None news yet whether that will be extended beyond that period of time, but we know that. Alongside that, we get self-isolation practical support fund. So this is where people are being asked to self-isolate. We get funding to enable people to get practical support, be that with shopping or any other task that they need that they can't leave the house for. So that funding has largely been used to support the network of community care hubs in the city, and we've constantly funded those, and obviously we used the last batch of money to fund them through to the end of March to continue doing that work, which has been really successful. We've also provided some funding through Voluntary Action Leeds, and they manage that community care hub network, and they're going to do some research and evaluation of the scheme. So once we know, obviously that we'll feed that into what we do. I suppose the big area is the various COVID grants. So these are funding that we've received from DWP. There's been 3 together, sort of related but unrelated in the came that separate. Each has got separate requirements. There was the winter support grant that we got originally, then there was the local support grant, and recently the household support grant, which is the one we're currently administering, and that's that's for spending between October and the end of March this year. So that's overall across all of those 3 schemes, we've had just over 14 million. And fundamentally, that's been used to provide food support via schools. So we've used a lot of that money to do free school meals during the holidays and half-term holidays. So we've reached 33,000 children have had vouchers or hampers, certainly the beginning hampers, all 100% now vouchers. That's administered via the schools. We provide that to free school meal children. We also give an additional 10% to schools to provide to families who they feel are vulnerable, but who may not be eligible for free school meals, and for any children or families who've got no recourse to public funds. We also use that money to support families with children aged 0 to 4 who don't get free school meals. So we've provided that. That's over 5,000 children in the city. And obviously we support care leavers as well. We've used that funding to support over 50 charities and third sector organisations in the city to deliver a range of activities, food related, things like baby bank, refugee support, etc., a number of things. And we've also used that money to support people with fuel payments. So certainly people who are on council tax support, we've given a direct cash award to cover their fuel bills. I think there's about 45,000 people in the city, and we've done that a couple of times, and we're doing that again through Household Support Fund. So all in all, that's a big area. I suppose the the issue that we have with this, is welcome as it is, and it's been very welcomed over the last couple of years, is it is short term, and often we're not getting that money, or we don't find out about that money until quite late afterwards. So we're very reactionary around it. I know the government are looking now at certainly welfare support and whether or not there's going to be a more sustainable amount of money put into that going forward, which would be very welcomed. But the way it's operated through these packages has been quite difficult to administer. So just moving on quickly in terms of welfare and benefit activity. Again, that's covered there. Free school meals, obviously that's service administrator who is eligible for free school meals, and there's been almost a 10% increase in that number compared to last year. In terms of housing benefits, this is as of September last year. The caseload is just short of 37,000, of which just over 22 are of working age. Obviously, housing benefit claims have reduced by nearly 22,500 since the rollout of UC full service began in October 2018. So that we have seen that reduction. Obviously, we still get people claiming for council tax support and free school meals, and through that, which is still administered by us. In terms of council tax support, we actually run two schemes. We run the sort of legacy scheme that was introduced a good few years ago, and then we introduced a universal credit council tax support scheme when universal credit was rolled out. So there's been a small drop in numbers there from just over 66,000 to just over 64,500. So we are continue to administer our council tax support scheme. It's something that we review every year. In terms of welfare rights, the number of clients has increased from just over 12 to just over 14,000, and obviously that's a reflection, as you would imagine, of increasing demand. And then just a final slide from me on reducing into poverty associated with food insecurity. As that said, there 1 in 10 adults and 1 in 5 children in the UK experience some sort of food insecurity. Like I've mentioned, through the community care hubs and during COVID, we set up a emergency food process that existed alongside the sort of pre-existing citywide network, which was already very comprehensive, and that did a significant amount. As I said, I think I said before, 160,000 food parcels or whatever. During 2021, we continued with that support through the care hubs, but also we provided funding to the care hubs to work with individuals and families to sort of get them off that dependency of food and to provide different routes to tackle their food. So linking very much in with the existing infrastructure. So there were, in terms of the food banks, but also things like the various kitchens that were set up by the community care hubs and things like that. So we're very much focused on that. We obviously work in partnership with Fair Share, Yorkshire Leeds Food Aid Network and Foodwise Leeds. And it's just highlighting there the work of Fair Share, who support 124 frontline organisations in Leeds and provided over 540,000 tonnes of food in 2021. And that contributed to 1.28 million meals supplied in 2021. And just, I'm sure some members are aware, just in response to this increased activity around food insecurity, there's a Leeds Food Insecurity Task Force. It's been established this year. And that's going to provide a forum to aid development of strategic approaches to tackling food insecurity in the city. And it's anticipated that the meetings will be attended by reps from cross-council services and key partner organisations. So that's it. From the council's perspective, I can now hand over to Rebecca, if that's okay.
Thank you, Lee. So to provide a national update, during the pandemic, the Plan for Jobs was obviously rolled out across the country nationally, and part of the Plan for Jobs was the introduction of the new Youth Employability Work Coach. So this is where they are out there in the community as well as job centres supporting some of our harder to help young people, working with customers aged 16 to 24. So that's a national role within Leeds. That team consists of 7 youth employability coaches. The Restart programme, there to support some of our customers affected by the COVID-19 pandemic who've not sustained employment within 9 months, the first 9 months. Locally within Leeds, we have had over 2,000 starts on the Restart programme. So that's customers on universal credit accessing that help to restart. Conditionality has recently been reintroduced across all our heritage benefits and universal credit. There has been secondment of 10,000 staff from across different departments to support the local office staff in relation to new claim processing and the payments of benefits during the pandemic. We have no further update for you in connection with managed migration or the reintroduction of the pilot that was running in Harrogate. Also as part of Plan for Jobs was the youth hubs that was introduced, and again within Leeds we've got one of those that have opened, and we have a complex needs youth hub due to open shortly. We've just got the risk assessment sorted with that, so there's 2 youth hubs with Leeds. In connection with a local update, we've continued to work with all our partners and obviously adapt the needs to a changing customer base. I think it's important to stress that our job centres did remain open during the whole of the pandemic. It was a different service for the majority of our customers, but our most vulnerable were always able to still be seen face to face. We have procured a local provision to support some of our individuals, and just some examples of that listed on there. Domestic violence, support for our prison leavers and customers requiring support with substance abuse and mental health. The social justice team, I'm really hoping that you're all sort of familiar with the Leeds social justice team. It's been well established across the city since 2014. That's a team that work out there in the community in partner settings. So in effect, it's taking the job centre to the community, supporting some of our most vulnerable in that multi-agency wraparound support. That has continued to be at the forefront, supporting our most vulnerable. What's worked particularly well in Leeds for us is that with the implementation of the Youth Employability Coach, which again is for our complex age 16 to 24, they've worked fantastically alongside the social justice. So it's really rolled out successfully for us in Leeds. What we've also done as well across the city is introduced a specialism in connection with our prison leavers across each job centre in Leeds. It is actually a West Yorkshire initiative that's actually an alliance that I'm chairing and rolling out, as I have responsibility for prison work coaches. But that's tied up really well with the social justice and the YEC team, as well as other partners and stakeholders as well. Co-location working arrangements with staff from Housing Leeds continuing. The escalation process, for some of you who may be familiar with colleagues that were part heavily in the partnership team of DWP and since moved on, namely Simon Betts and Ali France. We've got a new partnership manager in place, and those escalation processes have been revised, ensuring that partners are able to obtain the relevant information in line with current guidance. 3 temporary job centres to accommodate the demand in the increase in claims to universal credit. One of them in the city centre, one of them on the east of Leeds, and one of them at Kirkstall. The city centre and the East Leeds is specialising in our youth unemployment, but does still have the facility for some other customers. And the Kirkstall temporary job centre is for our self-employed customers. And we've continued to pay 90% of their customers the universal credit in full, which I think is testament to how challenging things have been for us as well. And I'll hand over to you, Diane. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think in terms of the advice sector, as has been described, what our experience is as others have reflected on, we're seeing more people being pushed into poverty during the pandemic, and people in more and more difficult circumstances. We did campaign for the £20 uplift for universal credit to be maintained, but unfortunately that was withdrawn, and that has had a very severe effect on universal credit claimants. And we're still pushing for that to be reintroduced. One of the things more recently, as Lee mentioned, a number of measures were put in place, and there were a number of measures that meant there was some relief for people claiming benefits in the work assessments where it's suspended and so on. As those things are being reintroduced, we have, for example, seen a big resurgence in demand for people from people in relation to personal independence payment claims. And we just see time and time again people who their claims are turned down, their appeals are turned down, and it's their third appeal where actually they get an award of payment, and you see people then awarded thousands of pounds in back payments, which is, is quite distressing, because those are actually very vulnerable people who should have had that money, from the start, but are forced to go through a very lengthy process. So it's disappointing to see that kind of coming back again. Fuel poverty has been mentioned. Obviously, we're all aware that that's becoming increasingly an issue. Again, we're calling for the benefits up rate. They're being uprated at 3%. We think that that should be 6%, which is in line with the more current rate of inflation. And also that the warm home discount and other schemes should be extended to include more people in that. At Citizens Advice Leeds, we've been working with Northern Power Grid for a number of years. They fund us to provide advice specifically around fuel issues and fuel poverty. That's actually being extended. So next month we will be offering a free phone helpline for West Yorkshire, particularly around fuel advice and fuel poverty, which is, we're very grateful to Northern Power Grid for their support on that. In terms of other areas of advice, particularly around debt advice, some members may be aware that nationally the Money and Pension Service was re-tendered the contracts for debt advice at the end of last year. And basically right at the 11th hour in December, they announced they were suspending part of that process. So face-to-face services are for the moment carrying on as before, but there will still be a move to a national telephone and digital service. So most of that advice nationally will go to that telephone and digital service. And we're waiting for an announcement from Money and Pension Service, but our expectation is that face-to-face advice will be still significantly reduced, and people will be expected to go to telephone and digital services. We've seen quite a lot of staff leave as a result of the disruption. It was clearly a very disruptive time, and it does mean nationally there's reduced capacity because people have simply voted with their feet, given the level of uncertainty. Help to Claim, the service that supports people with universal credit claims, similarly has gone through a tendering process. And that is also moving to a national telephone and digital service. So there will no longer be a local face-to-face provision around that. I'll leave it there. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you both. So just in terms of a very short conclusion, obviously, as I mentioned at the beginning, we have got a history of strong partnership working in the city, and that continues to underpin the strategy we take around sort of financial inclusion and tackling poverty. And it did obviously put us in a good position at the beginning of the pandemic to respond, because a number of the things that we had and we put in place during COVID were things that were already there, or the infrastructure was there and things like that. So we could do that. But as colleagues have reflected on, the demand in the city is increasing for support, advice, etc. And that's probably only likely to continue. So even though, we do have a really good approach in Leeds, we have some great working relationships, we have some great services in place, the reality is it's probably not enough. And if I reflect back to that point I made at the beginning about the resilience issue and how relatively small scale changes can impact on people's. And it's, I think, you know, even JRF, you know, they've said that we probably need to rethink the support. And, you know, it's, even though it's early days, that, you know, there is talk certainly coming out of government around looking at welfare support and how that might be different, which is to be welcome. But I do think, you know, there is fairly good, well, very good evidence to suggest that we do need to think about a different approach and a different model. So obviously we, as a city, we are looking at developing a strategy, a financial inclusion strategy that picks up on things and addresses some of the stuff that, you know, things like digital and things like that, digital inclusion, which are obviously key issues now. But you know, we will continue to do the work that we do, and obviously we'll bring that back into scrutiny and for comment, for your comment, as and when that gets developed. But happy to open it up for questions.
I've got Councillor Brooke, first of all, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for that really useful and interesting report. Very saddening as well, like seeing the sort of breadth of desperation, to be honest, like especially with the, I know from casework and stuff, the £20 cut in universal credit is really not people for six. Just a few really quick ones. So the food insecurity task force, you were saying that it was going to be strategic, but in terms of the impacts that could be done, like food pantries basically is what I'm saying. Can we get some kind of coordinated food pantries sorted out rather than the food bank model? Because it's working very, very well, like the ones that have been set up sort of organically, but then we've got a fair few areas where there isn't the local capacity to set them up, and it gives people, you know, there's not as much stigma surrounding them, and I just feel that it'd be a really good way to move forward, though it's not really strategic, it's operational. But anyway, secondly, the help to claim. I'm just wondering if you know if there was an equality impact assessment done when that decision was taken, because it's just like, honestly, I think that's disgraceful. The amount of people that have very, very complex paperwork and need a lot of assistance to sort through that paperwork. I mean, people who turn up to the citizens' advice with unopened letters that I know that your staff and team will be helping them open them, and I can't cope. I'm so sorry. Like, that's awful. Okay. Thank you.
To lead off, Diane?
I'll do
you've right. Okay.
In terms of the food pantries, absolutely. You know, as I think I mentioned, we provided some funding to the community care hub network to develop the sort of food, you know, that sort of food pantry provision. But that's something that the task force is certainly geared up. And there's one particular work stream which is very much around the sort of the tackling food insecurity area. So we would be looking at that. And yeah, I mean, anything that we, you know, food, you know, the growth in food banks is, you know, it's uncontestable in that sense. But we are working with Trussell Trust, for example, who actually don't want to provide the food bank in that sense. Nationally, their policy is not to do that. So we are working with them on a pilot like the cash grants. So we actually provide money to people rather than food pass, because it obviously from a dignity perspective and all of those, it's much better. to do that. So there's those things, and hopefully they will grow and become much more across the city. But yeah, in terms of the sort of food pantry model and things like that, that's definitely an ambition that we have. So I'll let Diane do the help to claim.
Diane.
Yeah, so in terms of help to claim, I know that Citizens Advice nationally throughout the whole process have argued that face-to-face advice should be retained. They've done throughout that through the initial consultation and during the actual process. Ultimately, if you're bidding for the work, you have to bid for what's on offer. So that's what that's the position you're left with. I believe that a challenge has gone in about, to my knowledge, an equality assessment hasn't happened. Well, I think the question was asked whether an equality assessment had been made, and I don't think an answer has been provided. So you have to read into that what you will. But as things stand, that's the funding that's forthcoming for that national service. To be fair, I have to acknowledge, we've been delivering telephone and digital for the last couple of years. To be fair, while we've been in this situation, but I think as a permanent solution, as you say, we recognise there are people who struggle with that, and it is a big concern.
Thanks for that. Yeah, I agree that there needs to be a face-to-face, and I'll be very, very interested to see if that equality impact assessment comes back, has been done, because I cannot see how there has been one done to stop that really important service. Anyway, I'll shut up. Thank you for all your hard work.
Yeah, the question is about, we have had those community hubs, and we're now working to a programme with Voluntary Action Leeds at looking at anchor organisations to continue that vital and important work that's been done in our most inner city and vulnerable communities. So I'd like to hear something about how that's going to be extended, Lee, to look at that. And also about picking up on the point that Councillor Brooks has made about food pantries. We've now got a number of food clubs operating in areas, and I think that's a really good model that we can build on and put that in. And finally, it is a concern to me about vulnerable people with special educational needs and mental health issues, that how are they going to cope with this reduction of funding and the withdrawal of the help and support to benefits. And I want to see what we're doing as a council to broker that approach.
Lee?
Yeah, in terms of the community care hubs, as I said, we've provided funding through COVID, and that funding, what we've asked of that funding has changed throughout. So at the beginning, it was very much around direct support. The second phase of the funding was very much around the provision of direct support where that was needed, but also, as Councillor Reagan talked, moving that on to link in more with the anchor network, what the Voluntary Action Leeds are doing. And then the funding that we provided this time around that runs through to the end of March, we actually extended, so it carries on that work, but we also provided a pot of money that other organisations could bid for to become sort of community care hub by, light, but also take on that work, and we continue to do that. Just in terms of the anchor, I haven't got a huge, and I'm happy. In fact, I think there's a report coming to February Scrutiny around the third sector, which will probably cover a lot of the work around community care hubs and the anchor network, so that'll come to next. But I do know that they've set up now a network group that's going to meet on a regular basis, and I think there's about 15 to 20 organisations involved in that to take it forward. But I think the legacy of the community care hubs, I think you will feel that for a long time in Leeds, because I think it's been really successful.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, and
yeah,
just on the the mental health and, you know, the face-to-face stuff. Obviously, well, as Diane said, we had issues in terms of debt advice. We've done that through maps in the city and things like that. And we have the council commissions its advice contract, which is for a whole range of advice contract, which Leeds CAB deliver on our behalf, and we will continue to do that. Obviously, the risk and the threat from the changes to maps, which have been now put on hold or whatever, delayed, shall we say, was a risk, because it would have a profound impact on you know, the face-to-face debt advice in the city, and we will continue to work to think through a solution around how we can meet that ask. But I can't hand on heart say it'll be easy, because we were reliant on those face-to-face debt advisors to do a lot of that work. But, you know, I feel fairly confident that within the city we can come up with a solution. Whether that solution is enough or perfect, I can't say, but we certainly don't want to lose face-to-face advice, because for those people who have complex needs or things like that, it's so vital. And we know that through our own welfare rights unit and things like that, how important that help and support can be in terms of you know, outcomes.
Thank you. Anybody want to add anything? No. Okay. So Councillor Ritchie, then Councillor Charlwood.
Thank you. My question's about the impact of sanctions on claimants, and then the knock-on effect on our local welfare support scheme. Do you think that some sanctions are too punitive? And, you know, again, we only have one side of the story, but I hear of people who don't have any phone credit, so they're not picking up calls, hence missing appointments. I witnessed, I'm going back a few years, someone who was asked to attend a meeting like the next day, and he had care and responsibilities, and he was told, if you don't, you'll be sanctioned. He ended up walking out, so I assume he got sanctioned. That was a few years ago, but that's stuck with me for a long time. So that's the first question. The second question, you talked about a lot of support schemes, job creation schemes and what have you, like Kickstart and other groups. I know bid for lots of big money contracts to help support vulnerable people into work. Do you have targets for outcomes? And if they're not met, are there any penalties? Do you switch to organisations perhaps that have had a better track record? So I know Prince's Trust claim a 70% or have in the past of getting people into work. The council, our service, I forget the percentage, but it's higher than DWP from what I recall. So a bit like pupil premium, if something's not working, do we stop it and try something else? Or these organisations just sort of milking the system and not necessarily providing good outcomes?
Thank you. So in connection with your first question regarding sanctions, there is a very strict process in place regarding sanctions. We have to notify the customer well in advance, which is 48 hours at the moment of an expectation to attend an interview. Telephone interviews are not sanctionable, it's face-to-face appointments. The next part of the process, so what should happen is, so the process that's happening at the moment is they're given 48 hours notice at least, but it should be happening. So at the moment, the regime that we are trying to work, and I'm not saying that it's happening all of the time, is in the regime is the first 13 weeks of a customer claiming on universal credit, in the all work related regime, is that we will ask them to attend weekly for the first 13 weeks. So the reason I'm giving you that rationale is because ideally they will have their appointment booked. If they attend today, they'll know that they'll be coming in next week as well. But in the main, it is always at least 48 hours notification. The next step that we've got in place as well is that we do have a telephone call to remind them of their appointment. The third stage is if they do fail to attend and they haven't notified us by telephone or in their journal, is that we go out to them and we put a message on and ask for the reasons why they were unable to attend. And that takes so many days for that to come back to us. I do believe it's 7 days, but I will double check that for you. If at that point we still had no contact, there has to be a case conference between that work coach and the next grade to ensure that have we explored every possible avenue regarding vulnerabilities before we even consider referring it for a sanction. So it's a very in-depth process. Sanctions, I completely accept that they are exceptionally distressing for our customers. I think the key message for me to get out there regarding the sanctions is the numbers, and these are a little bit out of date because obviously we have been without the conditionality process for quite a long time during the pandemic. At the last check, it was 0.73% of our customers within Leeds that had actually had a sanction imposed. And as soon as we can get that engagement, then the sanction can be lifted. So I just wanted to point out there is a real strict process in place regarding us getting to the sanction, the actual sanction stage. Does that answer your question?
Well, it does answer the question, yeah. But, you know, look, we only get one side of the story, but when you get them on a Friday evening, we're struggling as to what we can help, and it puts a hell of a lot of pressure because at the end of the day, somebody's going to pick up the pieces, you know, whether it's providing a food sample or an emergency token and what have you. But yeah, you've provided the answer. So it'd be interesting to look at some case studies, but it's obviously confidentialities and what have you won't. But, you know.
By all means, any individual cases definitely send on to me. Confidentiality could potentially be an issue, but certainly I can ensure that that process has been followed accurately. I am confident that before it'll get to a decision maker, so all those steps it's gone through, they revisit each of the steps as well before they will even consider. So everything that's taken place locally, did we give enough notification? Did we arrange the call beforehand? Have we gone out and contacted them? All of those steps are explored thoroughly locally, but then also independently at the decision maker stage. In connection with your regarding work outcomes, would you just mind clarifying? I'm sorry.
So there's big money contracts. The government provide big money contracts to organisations to help people into work, those that have been out of work for a long time. And there's, and I know from previous reports, different organisations seem to have different success rates at getting people into work. DWP, Job Centre, used to be bottom of the pile, and which is probably why you commission other organisations to support people. But what I'm saying is, obviously, you gave us a long list of what you're doing. Do we have outcomes for them? Do you have targets for them and then sanctions for them if they're not meeting them? And if they're not working any schemes, do we stop them? Like the advice on pupil primaries, you implement something, if it's not working, stop it and try something else. Or are these contracts signed, sealed and delivered? And then we get to the end of a 12-month, 24-month period and find that outcome rates have been pretty rubbish. But, you know, the organisation directors have done very nicely out of it. And yet we're still in the same problem of people in that cycle of, you know.
Right, okay. So in connection with any contracts that are formed between DWP, they're formed nationally. There are some local ones that will be forged, but that's in connection with provision. National job outcomes are formed from our national teams and the legal teams, and I can assure you that those contracts are renewed and reviewed regularly to ensure that both ends of the parties are meeting the deal that they've entered into.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd first of all like to say thank you for all the work you do in all the departments, including the DWP. But I think the biggest issue really is the fuel crisis and the cost of living crisis. And what worries me is that the government's been very slow with the energy companies to do anything about it. And when we are one of the fifth, maybe the fifth richest country in the world, and at the same time, the North Sea oil companies are making massive profits. Even British Gas and Centrica are making enormous profits and paying their CEOs lots of money and the shareholders still. So what worries me is how it all affects people, you know, within Leeds, in particular people who are on prepayment meters. And are we in touch with those people who are on prepayment meters, because they are going to self-disconnect potentially, because they have that choice between heating and eating. And so issues like increasing the warm home discount, that will affect people, or help people who need help with their electricity bills, but the warm home discount generally doesn't help people with their gas bills. So even if we increase the warm home discount to £300, there's still some of the companies aren't big enough or haven't got the resources to fund the warm home discount. So that's one issue. The second issue is about the debt, what's happened with the money advice project in terms of like reducing the amount of face-to-face debt advice. And I think it's a short-term solution that the government's come up to try and save money, but in the long term, you're losing lots of experienced debt advisors, and that's diminishing the resources that are available to the city. So I wonder if, as a scrutiny board, cross-party, if you like, we can actually put some pressure on the government to come up with a solution that says we need face-to-face debt advice because that is essential to meet the needs of vulnerable people. Thank you.
From a scrutiny perspective, it's been heard, and I think we can try and get something done about it as a scrutiny board, to try and get a working group or something. And by working with the executive member, we can probably move that forward. But into the specifics, Lee, if you want to answer any of the specifics.
Yeah, just on the fuel position. I mean, in terms of what we do as a council, anybody who comes in contact, who rings out either through local welfare support or something, we will work with them. We have a contract with Green Doctors, so we can provide sort of fuel support, but we also refer them to Green Doctors who will work with them to provide different, and that's a really good solution. As I said, we are using some of the household support fund to provide a fuel payment to individuals and families on council tax support, and we do that. But the reality is, and I think there's another change due in April, is it, with the cap, and that's going to be a big change, and it is, and it's the fuel, that side is driving costs in local welfare support. More people asking for support around that and things like that. So it is a real concern. I won't comment on maps. I don't know, Diane, if you wanted to comment on that in terms of the broader book.
Me. I'm talking to myself. There's nothing unusual in that, is there? Or at least so my wife will say. As I said, I was wanting to thank Jo Rowlands for the work that she's been doing over the years in terms of moving this forward, and also to Nick Morgan, who's the Chapeltown CAB. He's not been able to come today because of the limits we've put on, but he is watching the webcast. And also Amy Porter, the policy officer, who is responsible for authoring the majority of this report. But there is a team of people behind here. And an example of that was yesterday, I attended a webinar organised by Groundwork on helping residents with energy costs. And they specifically mentioned the work that Leeds City Council was doing to try and help people as an exemplar on the way forward. So I think we are served by very high quality officers. I am making no comment about the DWP, as my wife is a member of the DWP, and I'll get condemned no matter what I say. And as far as the CAB is concerned, we know we are well served by the CAB as well. The one comment I'd make is, personally, I don't get a vast number of cases. And when I do get cases, I find that I cannot get in touch with the CAB. So if there was any way that an email address could be furnished to councillors that we could send things through, on 2 occasions I've contacted Lee to get Diane's personal email address so that I can try, not that I want to annoy Diane with the query, but it's the one person I know in the CAB. And so I've had to get Lee to give me her personal email address, which is great. But I then can't, so if there was an email address for some of us who don't have hundreds of cases like that, some of the members here do have a lot of cases. I don't. So I just need the odd help in hand to try and guide me through, because I'm not as an expert on the ground as some members are. Councillor Ritchie, yes?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I agree with that. We could also do with refreshed DWP contacts, because we had certainly Simon Bett's details, and now if Simon's been replaced or...
On that basis, Councillor Harland, would you just like to briefly, well, I say briefly, I don't mean you're restricted in the time, but what I mean is if you can sum up.
I'll be brief, Chair. Thank you. I think what I was going to say in conclusion, Lee said in his conclusion after the presentation, which, you know, yes, we are held as an exemplar. And I think looking into both the presentation and the more in-depth report, we can see why. We were able to respond as a city as we did because of the relationships that were already embedded across the city. The team always reacts in a positive way. You know, they come up with problems and issues that they have to react to quickly. Grants come in and change, rules change, and they always react really positively. And I'd like to thank our partners, but Lee's teams, shall we say, because, as I've said, they always react positively, not just to what they have to deal with day in, day out, but I think to members as well. And I think that's come through today with the comments that have been made. And I think it shows through in the passion and the compassion that they show when they are dealing with these things. So I'd like to say thank you. Thank you to Scrutiny for your continued input in this. And again, thank you to the partners across the city. Thank you.
So, Simon, instead, we were going to get a presentation, but instead, Simon, who will introduce himself, is just going to briefly outline and then ask you for your views.
Afternoon, everybody. Sorry about this rather rushed item. The Best City ambition is just finished its public consultation phase. So just before Christmas, Executive Board considered the draft Best City ambition, which is a refreshed look at the overarching strategic direction of the city, which is intended to build on primarily on the experience of the last 18 months, I guess, with the pandemic and what we've learned from increased partnership working, what we've learned from pooling resources and shared priorities with partners, but also a stronger engagement with communities. It's also an opportunity to kind of consolidate a whole range of strategies that exist around inclusive growth, health and well-being, and climate change. And we've just, last Thursday, the kind of public consultation finished. We had 280 responses, overwhelmingly positive, both in terms of the direction of what we're trying to do, but also in terms of the detail. That said, I think some of the things that have come out strongly, both in terms of the conversations that I think many of you were engaged with via community committees prior to the drafting, but also what we've got from the consultation feedback is along the lines of making sure that this city ambition influences and directs, but it also responds to local issues on the ground. I mean, that was probably the biggest thing that came out of it. The second biggest thing that came out of it, which is primarily my fault, is that it needs to be in plain English. And there's a lot of work that we're trying to do at the moment to kind of respond to that, to kind of get it much more understandable and much clearer to a whole range of people. I guess the only other things I would pull out is that it does focus on the 3 pillars. It is about a high-level document that is then designed to both influence and respond to partner priorities, other strategies and relationships with communities. But also, we've spent quite a lot of time trying to explain about how we're going to work, as well as what we're going to try and work towards. So, co-production with communities, strong partnership working, evidence-based, and this issue about making a reality at a local level all feature strongly. So we are frantically redrafting it now. It will go to executive board in February, then full council in February. Then the next stage is where the real work starts, is around, okay, what does this mean in terms of influencing strategies underground? How does it link to the locality review and the neighbourhood and communities review? We'll need to review strategies, and probably of most interest, well, of particular interest to this board will be, we intend to have a transitional year in 2020, but actually overhaul the performance framework in light of the city ambition. And I'll pause there, Chair. Thank you.
Any specific questions? I mean, I accept that most of us have probably had it at least at our community committee and on a number of other committees that we sit on. We've also heard this. What date do you have to get the scrutiny board responses in by?
The end of this month.
The end of this month, right. So, yeah, I'll bring in Councillor Jenkins in a minute. So what I'm suggesting is that if you have any comments that you would like to specifically make that you've not had a chance to do today, if you send them through to Becky, she will incorporate them in on our behalf. But that doesn't stop discussion. So on that basis, Councillor Jenkins.
Okay, so one of the things that I think the council is heading towards is becoming a Marmot city, and I just wondered if that could be incorporated into the city ambition.
Just to confirm, that's come strongly through the consultation response. We will ensure that that is reflected in the final version. Yes.
Certainly know that Councillor Venner is going. She spoke quite at length at the Adults and Health Social at Scrutiny Board on that very issues. And I think I was out at the time, but I think she also referred to it as well at the last council meeting. So Councillor Venner is well leading on that. Anybody, any other question? Councillor Howley? And then Councillor Ritchie.
Very minor point. I'm aware of the fact that the issue of plain English in council reports has hit media in a big way in the last couple of days. You're writing on, complex, difficult stuff, and I think these reports are very well written. My only little piece of feedback would be just a little bit more, if you like, glossary and explanation of the key terms, which lay people will not necessarily understand. But I think some of the criticism actually is rather unjust and harsh in circumstances. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a point I raised at yesterday's scrutiny board, but I feel so strongly about it. I'm going to make it again, and it's the lack of mention of disabled people in the document. And I asked yesterday, and I'm sure Becky will have captured it, about a commitment to the social model of disability. So I say I mention it again because it's so important.
I got that feedback yesterday, Councillor, and we will ensure that we respond to that.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just to go back to the matter of plain English, I did mention this at the last scrutiny, so I'm pleased that it seems as if some work's going on to do with that. but I can go back far enough to remember when this issue was raised before, quite a few years ago, and there seemed to be quite a bit of work go into it. And this was in general to do with the council on reports, various scrutinies, etc. And then somehow or other, over time, we seem to go back in a lot of cases to writing reports, etc., for people that how they are written, it would seem as if everybody's just supposed to understand what the officer is talking about, and seems to forget that a lot of the reports that are written, people, the public can request them, like for instance, Scrutiny, but whether they can understand them or not is a totally different matter. A good way to do this, I think, is to just to ask somebody, one of your residents, right, you know, can you understand that? I think officers need to think a bit more about that. Sometimes even councillors have, have comments on how they're written. And so poor Mr. and Mrs. Smith out there has got no chance.
We don't know.
So, you know, can we bear that in mind? I know officers, you know, are writing stuff within their own understanding, and quite a lot have gone to university and write stuff, presuming that they are writing for people that, as I said, can automatically understand what they're talking about. But I'd like to include the public more. So all I'm saying is I'm pleased that the comments being taken on board about this particular matter and this particular report, but I would ask everybody to bear that in mind. The public out there, you know, it's about them, it's to do with them. Let us write it in such a way that people can understand it.
Okay, I mean, just on that very point, does the crystal mark still exist?
I'm not sure I've ever heard of the crystal mark, if I'm honest.
Thanks, Chair. Best city. That sounds like a leaderboard and we're at the top. So do we know where we are at the moment? How far have we got to go before we're the best city? I think that'll be one thing that the public would actually like to know and would ask fairly quickly.
I think to be honest, I think that best city phrase has had some history, hasn't it? So I think it was an issue about there was a strong belief that we should retain it because that's an aspiration. I think how you measure it, I think, is maybe something that which we've never really sat down and thought, how do we measure it in that kind of basis in terms of a headline kind of handle ambition. But I think that's certainly something we probably should think of in terms of revising and overhauling the performance framework, which would follow it. Because again, it's more of it's based on a perception that we want to be perceived as the best city, and perhaps we need to break that down and think about what that means and what are the markers and what are the baselines against which we should measure progress. So that's something we need to think about.
I think that's essential now. I mean, if it's a phrase we've had for a while, we should be at the top. And I know leaderboards that we do get occasionally. I don't think we've ever been at the top of anything. We've been close, but you know, it's just, it does sound like we should be doing everything better than everyone else. Well, certainly Manchester anyway. Thanks.
Some of us support football teams that will never get near the top, even no matter what. So, but we still represent them. But no, I do think maybe that is a role for scrutiny. We heard the performance report today, and so I think we maybe need to look at the role of scrutiny in making sure that the performance reports reflect back the strategic approach that's in this. And the same goes when information is getting passed down at community committee level. Sometimes we can have some wonderful debates at community committee, and other times you think, why are we discussing this? It's just those types of things. I think if we had the data, it makes it relevant for our residents. They can engage. I heard what you said about the number of consultee responses, 750 or 760,000 people. Not a lot, but that's not necessarily your fault. That's not necessarily your fault. I'm not pointing fingers and blaming, but maybe we should try and target more people. Councillor Charwood.
Thanks, sorry, just sometimes these things are sort of designed to make us feel good, aren't they? And like, we like this language, so we're going to be the best city, you know, it gives us a purpose, and it's, but it'd be quite nice, and Councillor Connor's point about now and the future, it's just thinking, reflect on what you were saying, that if we were to say, well, you know, Birmingham are really good at X, and we want to be better than that, so that's our ambition, and Manchester are really good at this, and so we can not, rather than saying we're the best, and maybe not being the best at anything, actually, you know, having that humility and saying, well, we actually aspire to be better at this, and we want to be like that and better than this, and they're good, and actually recognise others' successes as well. Maybe.
And then I'll give Simon the last say, and then we will close.
Sorry, Chair, it's just following on from that point, because there's two ways of looking at it. So we can look at it and say we want to compare ourselves to Manchester, Birmingham, Sheffield, wherever, and how do they do it and how can we be better? Or we can look at it from the perspective of our residents, and we can actually say, how do you feel about this? What would you like to see? And you know, really try and engage them, because we do these consultations, and out of an enormous city, we get several hundreds of responses, and we should be doing much better. And we're here to represent the city, we're here to represent our residents, so we need to engage our residents, and we need to really listen to them and see what they want and how they feel. Because if we say we aspire to be the best city, then in whose eyes and for what purpose?
Thank you, and thank you for those really helpful comments and input. I think we'll take these away. I'm confident that we can respond positively and ensure that we take them into account and play it back to you. The other thing that I should have said in my rather rushed preamble is that if this is going to really have traction, then its influence and practical influence and direction on all the other strategies and prioritizations and things that we do that follow. So I guess I'm saying that the kind of fingers crossed adopting the best city ambition in February by council is almost the start of a next phase rather than the end of it. And so I'm sure we'll be coming back to you on a fairly regular basis to report progress. So thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Simon. Board meeting is on the 24th of February at 10:30. Thank you very much, and I apologise for the length of the meeting today, but hopefully you've seen that we've got a wide range of issues, and they are all very important to us and our residents.